Hello, everyone, welcome. And I have a very interesting topic for you all. Today, we're going to be talking about the true origins of humanity. We're going to be talking about how human beings came to exist, how we came on this planet, who created us, and some of the myths and legends will be dispelled today about the stories of our creation, the ones from the fake religious texts. And we're going to shed light on the nature of our creators, these beings, extraterrestrial beings who came from the higher dimensions, from other star systems, who not only created us, but they also genetically modified us in ways that's suited them. And yeah, there's a lot of history to discuss. So today, as I mentioned, we have a very interesting topic. It's about the Anunnaki. The Anunnaki, some people may have heard of this term, others may not have, but they play a very important role in the history of humanity. And it is very important for us to be in touch with our history. So we're going to take a few minutes before we get started, and I wanted to remind everyone to please go on our website. We have a very powerful workshop. It's a 2-day workshop that's coming up. It's called Manifest Wealth and Abundance Using Your MERKABA. It's taking place on August 7th and 8th. It's a 2-day event. Both days it goes from 6 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time, and it's online via Zoom, and it's $222 to join for both days. I mean, you pay $222 for the ticket and you get access for both days. And it's going to be very powerful. In this workshop, we're going to explain what is your MERKABA. We've already done part one of the workshop, so we won't go into the basics too much, but we'll do a little bit of a refresher on what is the MERKABA. And then we're going to go straight into how to use your MERKABA to manifest the life of your dreams. Eldora and I have been using our MERKABA for a while now, and we've literally seen miracles upon miracles. We've taught the level 1 course a year ago, and hundreds of people, if not approximately 1,000 people joined, but hundreds of people messaged us and let us know their breakthroughs and how their lives have changed. And many people have said that since using the MERKABA, they can manifest much more easier. They can manifest much more quicker and faster. And this is one of the main uses of the MERKABA, although there are many, many, many uses of the MERKABA. One of the main uses is that it's a quantum computer that allows you to bring your thoughts and dreams into physical reality. And that's what we're going to go in depth in this workshop. So you can find all the details at www.eldoraandsiman.love, and would love to see you there. Today's topic is about the Anunnaki. And Anunnaki literally means those who came from the heavens. And Anunnaki were a bunch of, it's actually a pantheon of extraterrestrials. They are a reptilian humanoid race. So they look like humans, but they are much larger in stature. Like compared to us, they're like 14-foot giants. They are very strong, very powerful beings, but they're not very evolved. So they're from the fourth dimension. They're not like an evolved descended race. As you know, in this galaxy, there's many variations of races. Some species have ascended, like the Arcturians have ascended, the Andromedans have ascended, Pleiadians have ascended, and the Sirius B races. There's many races within the star system Sirius B that have ascended, but there's also within each of these star systems, because when we talk about a star system, we're talking about hundreds or thousands of planets sometimes in a star system. And within these planets, there's also variations. So within the Sirius B star system, although it's the 90% positive star system, there are certain races that are advanced technology, like they have space travel technology, but they're not very advanced otherwise. They're spiritually still in the duality zone. So they're still warring against each other. They still have ego trips. They still have like kind of very barbaric kind of rituals that that even we would find barbaric by human standards. So the Anunnaki is one such civilization that came to Earth approximately 450,000 years ago. So they're the ones that came here. They're the ones that literally genetically created the human civilization. And according to Plato, they also created advanced technological cities. They created the whole civilization of Atlantis approximately 250,000 years ago. So all of these advanced cities of Atlantis were the creation of these Anunnaki godlike beings. They had this ego that they wanted to be worshipped. So they came here and they posed as our gods. And many of the myths and legends and many of the ancient texts and many of the religious texts have also been modified by them, and they're the ones posing as our gods. So when we say God created humanity, we're talking about them. So they are a negative reptilian race. You can look up all of the information that I'm discussing today. You can easily look it up and do your own research. I've been researching this topic for almost a decade now, and I've just found mind-boggling stories after mind-boggling stories. And no matter how many sources I've referenced against each other, they all have a common thread, and that common thread is something I've distilled over the years. I've separated much of the things that did not resonate with me, but these are the common threads that I'm going to be telling you today that I have found in hundreds of texts and thousands of texts, and they all tell the same story of how this pantheon of negative beings from Sirius came. Reptilian humanoids came 450,000 years ago, and they pretty much took over our planet. Um, so if you want to do your own research on this topic, you can look up the Sumerian tablets. You can look up a book called The Lost Book of Enki, and a very famous author on this topic. He's respected worldwide. His name is Zechariah Sitchin, and he wrote the book The 12th Planet and The Lost Book of Enki. So you can look that up. It'll shed a lot of light on this topic and give you a lot of details that go way deeper than today's high-level overview that I'm going to give you. So my intention is just to share my knowledge and research with you guys, and then if you're interested, you can look it up on your own. So these beings that came, known as the Anunnaki, why did they come here? Why did they come here 450,000 years ago? They originally belonged to a planet known as Niburu, and Niburu is known as a planet of destruction. It was not originally created as a planet of destruction. It was a peaceful planet, but negative ET races took over. These negative reptilians took over the planet Niburu, and they converted it into like a space station. So the entire planet Niburu, this we're talking about about 500,000 years ago, the entire planet Niburu was given an overhaul, and it was converted from a planet to kind of like a spacefaring space station. So it had its own propulsion system, and it could actually travel anywhere within the galaxy. So within the planet Niburu, it was basically these negative reptilians that had made it their home, and their planet was dying. So from the ancient texts, when we read the stories, these beings themselves, the negative reptilians themselves, have left thousands and thousands of records on Earth, which are inscribed in stone tablets by ancient people. And all of these stone tablets tell their story. They've actually been decoded, and they tell the story in a lot of detail. And the funny thing is that our mainstream scientists have completely chosen to ignore all of this evidence. Although it's right there before our eyes, no one can ignore it once you start digging into it. Our scientists have completely ignored all of this evidence, and what we see is we are looking at ancient tablets. Some of them can be dated back to 100,000 years ago. And within these tablets, you'll be shocked at the level of technology that is described. And they literally have diagrams depicting spaceships, aliens, unidentified vessels, flying vessels, gods coming down in chariots. So all of this is depicted very plainly, and it shows that Earth was not just Earth was not just inhabited by cave-dwelling people in ancient times. It was actually a thriving intergalactic civilization, and Earth was inhabited by species from all over our galaxy. But the main species that dominated our history for the last 450,000 years ago was these negative Anunnaki. And their planet, Niburu, was dying. From what we understand, that their atmosphere was getting too much radiation from their sun or something to that effect. And they needed gold dust. Their technology depended on the element gold. So they needed gold dust to be suspended in midair in their atmosphere in order to control the levels of radiation that were entering their planet. So they had already exhausted all the deposits of gold from where they could find it in their sector of the galaxy, and they came searching to Earth, and they found that Earth is extremely rich in gold. So they actually sent an expedition. This is literally narrated in the tablets. They sent an expedition to do an initial analysis of Earth. And when they came here with their first few spacecraft, they had scanning technologies, and they found that there were indeed rich deposits of gold on Earth. So they found that was a green light for them to just march in with their invasive fleet of destroyer. Kind of like they came with their army, and our solar system at that time was inhabited by many peaceful civilizations. So 450,000 years ago, what did Earth look like? It looked like the Lemurian civilization was here, and they were very peaceful, non-technological human species living here. They were descendants of the Lyrans and the Pleiadians, and they were very spiritual people, but they were not very much in their power. So their civilization at that time, 450,000 years ago, was known as the civilization of Lemuria. And these beings literally did not have to do much to take over our planet, because there was nobody there to fight them other than these peace-loving citizens of Earth. So what they did was they came with their technologies. They started setting up their bases, and eventually started setting up small cities, and literally moved into Earth and took over. And they also started mining gold. So for 200,000 years, it's said in their accounts that they started mining gold on Earth. So from the year 450,000 years ago till about 250,000 years ago, they were mining gold for a period of 200,000 years. Now, it's important to also understand here that these beings are not only very advanced technologically, but they're also genetically very advanced. So although they are a negative race, but they have gotten enough progress in genetics that they can expand their own lifespans, and some of them lived for 20 to 30,000 years. So when we talk about 200,000 years of mining gold on Earth, we're not talking about many generations. We're talking about a few generations of theirs, because they can live up to 30,000 years in one lifetime, and they're extremely strong, giant-like beings. So what happened was, for 200,000 years, they were mining gold, and the Anunnaki themselves brought their own workers to mine the gold initially, but the workers got tired. They started having riots. They said, we no longer want to mine gold. It's just too difficult, and we're not going to do it anymore. And they literally came in front of their ruler's house. Their ruler, the king, went by the name of Anu. That's where the word Annunaki comes from. Anunnaki literally means those who came from heaven. So Anu was their king. So they have a very tribal, they have a very kind of hierarchical system. So you can think of it as a tribal system where they choose one leader, and the leader was chosen by a battle to death. So every time somebody would challenge the king, they would have to battle the king to death. And if you kill the king, then you become king. It was uh, kind of like a savage society like that. And they respected strength. They respected people who were skilled warriors, and their whole society was based on war and strength and display of courage and all of those things. So Anu was their king, and he had two sons. So Anu stayed back on Niburu. He sent his two sons by the name of Enlil and Enki. He sent them with the whole entourage of Niburians or Anunnakis. He sent them to Earth to mine gold. Enlil was given the whole rulership of the Earth, and Enki was kind of like given a subsidiary position underneath Enlil. So from their stories or politics, it's never revealed why the two brothers technically under the king should have equal status, but Enki had a lower status than his brother Enlil. Enlil was given the final say in all the decision making on what happens to Earth. And Enlil was also the more strict one out of the two brothers. He was more by the book. He just carried out the commands of his father, and he did not like he was kind of like the more evil kind and the more cruel kind. So he didn't take any bullshit. But Enki was the one who had a softer corner for humanity, and that also plays out in a very interesting way in the history books. So Enlil and Enki were both stationed on Earth as the commanders in chief, and they were ruling over all of the other Anunnaki. They were giving all the commands, what to do, how to. They were building cities, they were building civilizations. They're the ones who initially built the whole civilization of Atlantis. So that happens a bit later. But at this point of the story, we were up to the point where the Anunnaki had been mining gold for 200,000 years, and they were just tired. They said, this is not what we signed up for. We're not going to do this anymore, and we want out. And they rebelled. They still had respect for their leader, so they didn't like rebel, but they just said, we've had enough. And they gave up their shovels, so to speak. So what this caused a great concern, and the whole councils on the home planet Niburu were discussing other options, what to do. And at that time, Enki, who was the son of Anu, the prince Enki, he was also a genetic scientist. So he came up with the plan that he would create a local hominid species that would be used as a slave race. So initially, they did create humanity eventually, but initially in their first attempt, they did not create humans. In their first attempt, they took the ape DNA and they merged it with the humanoid DNA to make a sort of stronger ape-looking kind of species. So this was where, if you guys have heard the legend of Bigfoot, just think of like this 12-foot tall human-looking ape species, very, very muscular. That's where the Bigfoot legend comes from, because the species they created was a crossbreed between the ape and a human, and it was not given any intelligence. It was not given any method to reproduce, and it was this species of ape was created solely for the purpose of mining gold or to be used as slave labor in any fashion that they see fit. So what happened was they created the Bigfoot kind of species, and Bigfoot to this day still exists. I believe that they can be found within some of the mountains and forest regions of the United States. These are the descendants of the species that were created by the Anunnaki approximately 250,000 years ago. And this species was not able to reproduce, and although they were very strong, but because of genetic defects, they were not the ideal worker. So what happened is they created these ape-like beings and they were mining gold, but these beings were dying. They were dying very quickly. They would just get overworked and they would just fall to the ground and collapse. They had genetic defects, and because they did not have the ability to reproduce, it was very expensive for the Anunnaki to depend on these ancient Neanderthals for slave labor. So they needed a better solution. They needed like a longer term solution, and one that did not require them to constantly recreate new armies of slave labor in the lab. So what they decided to do, Enki was a genetic scientist, and his sister actually, I forgot her name, it's something like Ninhursag or something, but his sister was the one who came up with the idea that she would mix the genetics of the Anunnaki themselves with the ape DNA and create a human species. So they created the first humans in a lab. So what happened was they created the first humans in a lab, and the way they created them, first of all, they created a gated laboratory. It was called Eden. So in the Bible, the story of Garden of Eden actually refers to, because the Bible was actually also written by these Anunnaki. It was the word of God and the word of Jesus was severely distorted and overwritten, and many stories were inserted. So what we see as today's Bible is actually a mix of half of it is a mix of all these myths and stories from the Sumerian tablets, which you can see for yourself. So there was a garden named Eden, and it was not a heavenly garden. It was actually a laboratory. And Eden was a huge acreage with armed guards around it and huge walls. So it was like a prison for the for the beings that were created inside. No one could go in, no one could go out. And literally the armed guards were positioned in a gate that anybody that even tried to approach without authorization would be shot and killed on the spot. So it was very, very heavily guarded, like a secret. So Enki's sister had the idea to take the embryo, mix their own genetics, like the Anunnaki genetics, with the ape genetics, and created a human sample. So they created the first human samples within the lab, and she fertilized her own ovaries with this sample and birthed the first human from her own self. So the first creation that was birthed was a female by the name of Lilith. Lilith was actually the first creation, not Adam. Lilith was a female, obviously, and what happened is Lilith was the first creation that went wrong. She's the one that rebelled against them, and that's why they termed her as the evil one or the defected one. So the truth behind Lilith is that she was born of divine consciousness. Because when you create with advanced genetics a humanoid being, you still have a soul, and the soul comes from the higher dimensions, and there are many higher dimensional contracts that had to take place for all of this creation to be even allowed. So Lilith was the first creation, but she suddenly realized after being created that she actually embodied the divine Sophia consciousness. She embodied the Christ consciousness, and she realized that her creators have made her in a way that she would be subdued to them, and that she would be forced to worship them. And she did not want to worship her creators. She found out the truth very fast because she had a higher level of intelligence. So they immediately just locked Lilith up or whatever they did to her or banished her. I'm not sure what happened to Lilith after, but I do hear that later on there were wars that were against the Anunnaki that were headed by Lilith. Um, so then they decided, okay, we've created something really cool. This being can do a lot for us, but we need to dumb them down a bit. So when they dumbed down the version 2 of the humanoid that was created, they created Adam. And Adam, in his genetics, so Adam was created within the lab of Eden, and his genetics actually they had inserted subroutines within the DNA, which is called the worship gene. And you can look it up yourself, but humans to this day still contain this worship gene. And the worship gene makes us not question authority and makes us look up to people with more power. And the worship gene was literally inserted in us so that we would not question the official narrative that they fed to us, the Anunnaki, and that we would consider them as our gods and we would blindly take our commands from them. So they literally created Adam in this laboratory, and they wanted to also have Adam have a partner so Adam could reproduce. For them, reproduction was the solution to all of their slave workers dying. So it's not like reproduction was given as a gift from these gods. They just wanted us to reproduce so they didn't have to do it all the time. It was costing them a lot to genetically create new workers. So the story in the Bible that says Eve was created out of the rib of Adam was actually referring to the fact that Enki took a genetic sample from Adam's rib. So he took the bone marrow from Adam's rib, and from that bone marrow sample created a replica clone of Adam, which was known as Eve. So Adam and Eve are literally male and female replicas of the same DNA. So Adam and Eve were created, they were placed in the Garden of Eden, and they were observed. And Enki was the genetic scientist that created them. During this time when Enki was creating them, the elder brother Enlil, Enlil was the very strict, hard-headed one. He did not want humans to procreate or recreate. He did not want to allow them that because he thought that once that happens, the Anunnaki would have less control over us. So while Enlil was away, he was probably away on a home mission to Niburu or somewhere else in the galaxy, but he was away for a long time when these experiments were taking place by Enki and his sister. And what happened was the story of Bible that says that Adam and Eve ate from the forbidden tree of knowledge and they ate from the tree of knowledge and wisdom, that actually is a metaphor or symbology for giving Adam and Eve the ability to recreate. So the serpent talking to Adam and Eve and misguiding them, and the first sin, and that the fact that humans were born into sin, this is where that story comes from. They the fact that they said was a sin was actually Adam and Eve mating with each other, sexually reproducing. And Enki allowed that because he knew that Enlil would be enraged and he knew that it would not be allowed. So the only way he could do it, he did have a soft spot for humanity and he wanted them to have more control. So he did allow that, and he would observe them in the laboratory setting, and he would literally like their mating times and schedules were literally timed on the spot. So it would be literally that time of the month when it was ideal for them to mate, and they would be under observation and be forced to mate. And eventually Enki also, out of his soft heart for humanity, told Adam and Eve that they were not slaves. Initially they were born thinking they're slaves and that these beings are God. And Enki also spilled the beans a bit. He said he told Adam and Eve that they are equal to the Anunnaki. They're not subservient to the Anunnaki, and that they were born free, not as slaves. So when Enlil came back, he was enraged and he completely lost his cool. Enki was actually punished in for his actions by the king, by his father. However, it was too late. The damage had already been done. And this is where the whole Bible story of the serpent talking to Adam and Eve was actually Enki talking to Adam and Eve and teaching them the wisdom that they are not subservient to God, but they are equal to God, which is the Anunnaki. So let me know if you guys are following so far. I'm just reading some of the comments. Yeah, sexual suppression starts from this. Exactly. Yeah. So let me know if you guys have any questions. I'm going to check with the comments every once in a while. But let's get back to this story. So let me get back. I had written down a few notes so I don't lose my track. So when this whole creation story was happening, when Enki decided to be a genetic scientist and create humans in a lab, the elder races, the Pleiadians, the Sirians, the Lyrans, which were the galactic overseers, they were known as the Elohim, and they were the races of elders who reside in the higher dimensions. So this universe has lower dimensions and the higher dimensions. So these higher dimensional beings suddenly became very interested and they realized that they have to intervene because they did not want a slave race to be created. However, because these beings had just literally overpowered their way and had already created the species genetically without any intervention, the Pleiadians also intervened at that time, and they convinced the Anunnaki, or convinced Enki at that time, to introduce advanced genetic DNA that would remain dormant within the human DNA structure. So if the Pleiadians and the Lyrans and the positive Sirians had not intervened at the time of creation of humanity, we would literally be created with two strands and not have the ability to ascend. However, because they intervened and the Anunnaki were like smart, but they were not extremely smart. Like they knew how to create, but they were not like they their version of genetic creation was literally taking samples from here, taking a few steps and making something, but they did not know how the whole strands of DNA work, and they did not know how the higher dimensions work because they don't have that level of consciousness. So the higher dimensional Pleiadians, Sirians, and Lyrans were able to kind of silently trick them by allowing higher strands of our DNA to be involved in our creation. And we were born with 12 strands of DNA, although the Anunnaki had disconnected every strand other than our two strands. So we were born with 12 strands, but we only had two strands active. They had disconnected all higher strands. So let's get back to my notes for a second. Yeah. So, and when Enlil came back, he found that Adam and Eve have suddenly changed. He realized that they suddenly have knowledge and they suddenly have the truth and wisdom of who they are. And instead of walking around naked in the garden, they were actually wearing clothes. And he immediately punished his brother and he banished Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden. And that's when the Bible story goes that Adam and Eve were kicked out of heaven because they were eating from the fruit of tree of knowledge and whatnot. So this is the actual story that happened behind the scenes. They were kicked out of the Garden of Eden because by then they had reproduced and they had like a small population of humans. And eventually what happened was they were allowed to live. Adam and Eve were allowed to live. They were just banished and they had to um, go and join civilization outside and fend for themselves, but they had more generations. They were more generations of Adam and Eve, and humanity spread very quickly. So the human race was involved from the beginning in this slave mining trade for the Anunnaki, which we did for hundreds of thousands of years, God knows how long. So the human race was actually created 250,000 years ago by the Anunnaki, and we were pretty much subservient to the Anunnaki for most of our creation. The Anunnaki had created the civilization of Atlantis, where they had all kinds of galactic technologies. They had races from other advanced civilizations come to Earth. Earth was like a melting pot. Earth was the place where civilizations would hobnob and enjoy. It was kind of like full of many wonders and technologies. And humanity was kind of used as a slave, or it was also always considered inferior during the whole times of Atlantis. Although some humans also found a way to ascend, and they also found a way to activate their DNA strands. However, anytime the humans would start to rise in their evolution, they would immediately be squashed. So we were not allowed to fully ascend until now. So Atlantis rose up approximately 250,000 years ago. Before that, we had no technology, and all the technology that came to Earth was because of these negative ET beings known as the Anunnaki. And the Anu, their ruler, is also the Greek, in the Greek mythology, he's known as Zeus. And his trident was actually a galactic weapon. It could shoot bolts of energy, so it was like an energy weapon. And with his trident, he actually won many wars because it was an advanced technology from the Lyrans that he had gotten a hold of. So the slave labor for gold happened for many hundreds of thousands of years, and eventually the Niburians or Anunnakis, they got what they wanted. They got enough gold that they wanted to mine, um, and they were, from what I understand, from my knowledge, they were able to save their planet with this gold dust that they mined from Earth. And eventually, most of them left the planet. They lost interest in humanity, and the ones who stayed, like Enlil, Marduk, Zaruthra, these are all descendants of Enlil and Enki. Marduk was the nephew of Enlil or Enki. I'm not sure which one. I think Enki. Marduk was one of the most ruthless rulers in Atlantis. He was also known as the ruler Amun Ra, and he was responsible for a lot of atrocities against humanity, and he ruled with an iron fist. He was responsible for many wars and destruction, and it is said that Amun Ra or Marduk is actually Satan's commander in chief on Earth. He was literally an evil person, a very harsh person, and caused a lot of destruction and chaos. So Atlantis had its peaks and falls. Like there were five civilizations of Atlantis that rose and fall. So in this 250,000 year period, it's important to understand it's not like one civilization of Atlantis and then the fall of Atlantis. It was like five times Atlantis rose to a very peak civilization. It had glorious moments. It had moments of peace and harmony. It had moments of enlightenment. But then, anytime enlightenment came on the planet, these negative beings would crush it, and they would create a war or some other kind of destruction, and they would destroy the civilization again. So, Atlantis had five rises and falls, and the last fall of Atlantis took place started about 25,000 years ago. 50,000 years ago, the Anunnaki began to leave this planet, and from 50,000 years ago to 25,000 years ago was a period of darkness where a lot of Marduk's wars were taking place, a lot of tyranny was taking place, a lot of There were also genetic experiments, and all kind of grotesque creatures were being created in Atlantis. There was a lot of mind control. They had the Anunnaki also. They never wanted humanity to rise, so they also taught us the knowledge of black magic. So humans started doing black magic against each other, and psychic wars were fought against each other. So because of all of this negative use of negative energy on Earth, Earth decided that she wants to have a reset. So what happened was there was an experiment to create a synthetic Merkaba on Earth by these negative Anunnaki. And by creating a synthetic Merkaba, they did this in the Bermuda region, the area of the ocean where the Bermuda Triangle is. They created a synthetic Merkaba that, if they had succeeded, would pretty much let them dominate all of Earth's power and grids. So the Merkaba was used as a means to take over the whole planet's power grids. However, because they did not have the advanced knowledge of Merkaba, their plan catastrophically failed. And the synthetic Merkaba that they had created, for those of you who may not know what a Merkaba is, I just created a video in my last video. You can look it up. It's all about the Merkaba. So the synthetic Merkaba that was created, it was like this sacred geometry experiment that would allow them to harness all of the energy of the planet and use it as an energy weapon against different civilizations. But because they did not have advanced knowledge of the Merkaba, the whole experiment had a catastrophic failure, and the synthetic Merkaba crashed. And it is said to this day, until the 1990s, that the tip of the Merkaba, which is shaped like a pyramid, is jutting out of the Bermuda Triangle. So the Bermuda Triangle is actually the tip of the Merkaba that has sunk below the ocean. So the tip of the Merkaba actually passes through the Bermuda Triangle, which is demarcated by the triangular island configuration in the Atlantic Ocean. And its actual apex point of the pyramid of the Merkaba is in outer space. So the Bermuda Triangle, this is kind of a sidetrack, but the Bermuda Triangle, since I brought it up, was an area where the Merkaba had created a trans-dimensional portal, and any airplane or seafaring vessel that passes through that region would literally be transported into another dimension with no way of getting back. And according to my guidance, the positive ETs from Sirius B were able to correct this problem, and they completely deactivated the Merkaba by changing its spin ratio, and they deactivated the Merkaba, so the Bermuda Triangle is no longer a threat. So coming back to the story, about 50,000 years ago, the last golden age of Atlantis was here, and the destruction of Atlantis had begun. There were many wars. There was a lot of struggle taking place. Amun-Ra, or also known as Marduk, was inflicting a lot of pain on humanity, and because of this, Earth asked for a reset, and the higher hierarchies, or the angelic hierarchies, decided to send an asteroid to end the Atlantean civilization. So an asteroid would hit the planet and destroy the civilization, and that's when the Anunnaki decided to completely leave planet Earth. They realized that this planet would become uninhabitable at that point. However, Enki, having a soft corner for humanity, what he did was he went to his nephew known as Zaruthra, also known as the prophet Noah. So Enki gave Zaruthra the genetic blueprints, the schematics on how to build a high-tech submarine. And in this submarine, he also gave him DNA samples of every single plant species, every single animal species, and a bunch of humans from Zaruthra's tribe who were chosen to survive. So Zaruthra created this submarine before that final asteroid hit and destroyed Atlantis. And even this Enki did without permission from his father or without permission from his hierarchies. And Enki was again court-martialed or punished for that, whatever they have. But he did go against the wishes of his father and allow humanity to survive. And the only reason we're here, our civilization is here today, is because of Enki, because he allowed us to survive. And Noah's Ark was actually that submarine that was allowed to retain the DNA samples of every being on Earth. And the asteroid hit. The submarine was submerged underwater. It was safe underwater because most of the destruction was happening on land. And when Noah resurfaced hundreds of years later with his people and his species, all the DNA samples, he literally came on ground on a version of Earth that was like a post-nuclear holocaust kind of Earth. And he literally built society from scratch. And that was approximately 12,000 years ago. So this whole destruction actually happened about 13,000 years ago and ended around 11,000 years ago. So there was a period of 1,000 or 2,000 years where it was a complete nuclear winter on Earth, and all of our everything on surface had been scorched or frozen. You can still find samples of prehistoric fish on the tips of the Himalayas. How is that even possible unless the whole landscape was changed? So the Egyptian movement happened 6,000 years, 6,000 BC. So the Egyptian civilization happened after, and that's when Anunnaki made a brief appearance on Earth again and tried to revive their control over the planet again. And they saw that Christ consciousness was beginning to rise again for a short period in Egypt, and they came back and squashed it. And since then, they have literally been influencing humanity from afar. They have very limited presence on Earth, but they have infiltrated most of our religions, and most of our ancient texts come from their influence as well. And they're the ones who are posing as our gods to this day. So most people who are worshipping in mainstream religions are worshipping to these false gods, unfortunately. And the day I learned this, I was like, my whole world shattered, and I had to really rewrite my own history and like come to terms with things, with reality, because it's quite a lot to absorb. What actually happened behind the scenes, and even what I'm relating is just bits and pieces. The true account is far more wondrous, and it's literally like a sci-fi movie like Star Wars, but that's the reality. That's how our true history was. So I just wanted to share that with you guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this story, and yeah, I always welcome. This is just my account of my research. I would welcome your input on this. Maybe you have dug deeper than I have and have some interesting comments, interesting stories to share, and I would love to hear your versions and accounts of those details. And yeah, I'll be in touch with you guys very soon. Looking forward to connect with you all soon. Take care.